Some nights settle gently into the room. The body lowers into bed and the day grows quieter around it. Breathing slows without effort, and the outside world becomes less present. Within that calm, a light thread of awareness can remain. It does not rise sharply, nor does it fully dissolve. It stays in the background, steady and faint. Energy has already been spent across small demands and careful decisions. Rest feels like a natural continuation of that effort. Sleep arrives, and time passes. Morning sometimes carries a subtle heaviness. The sensation is quiet and persistent. It blends into routine without asking to be named. Nothing appears broken from the outside. Conversations unfold. Tasks move forward. The rhythm of the day continues as expected. Beneath that movement, restoration may feel incomplete. The system pauses, though it does not fully soften. A gentle readiness lingers, shaped by habit more than urgency. When strength has been practiced for a long time, stillness can feel unfamiliar. Ease requires a different kind of permission. For now, there is no need to change anything. Noticing the space between stopping and truly releasing is enough. A system does not remain gently engaged without history behind it. Readiness often forms through repetition rather than urgency. What feels automatic now may have begun as careful attention to what needed to be done well. Responsibility can train the mind to stay slightly active even after visible tasks are complete. When outcomes matter, remaining prepared feels stabilizing. That preparation does not always fade when the day ends. Over time, subtle engagement becomes familiar. Familiar states rarely feel concerning. They simply feel normal. A steady alertness can blend into identity without being recognized as tension. The nervous system adapts to what is practiced most often. If monitoring and adjusting are daily habits, those movements settle into the default rhythm. Stillness then feels less practiced, not because it is unsafe, but because it is less known. Mental fatigue grows quietly in this space. It accumulates through small uses of attention that rarely receive acknowledgement. Each silent evaluation leaves a trace. None overwhelm on their own. Together, they create a steady drain. Functionality can hide that drain. Work continues. Conversations move forward. The outer structure appears stable. Beneath that steadiness, recovery may remain partial. Letting go requires more than stopping activity. It depends on safety being felt at a deeper level. When alertness has been useful for a long time, ease can feel unfamiliar rather than immediate. Recognition alone begins to soften the pattern. Observing readiness without judgment introduces a different rhythm. Mental fatigue rarely appears in dramatic ways. It often settles beneath daily function, blending into productivity and routine without drawing attention. Because responsibilities continue to be met, the underlying strain can remain unnoticed. Efficiency can create the impression of steadiness. Tasks are completed. Conversations remain thoughtful. Decisions are made with care. The surface structure holds firm. Beneath that steady movement, energy may thin in subtle degrees. Attention remains available, though accessing it requires slightly more effort than before. Patience still exists, yet it feels narrower and less spacious. Gradual fatigue does not demand interruption. There is no sharp signal calling for pause. Instead, there is a quiet reduction of ease. Sleep may occur, though restoration feels incomplete. Because this change unfolds gently, it can be interpreted as normal busyness or simple adulthood. Function continues, so the system assumes stability. Recovery quietly moves further into the background. Competence often conceals this pattern. Capability stays visible. The steady cost of maintaining that capability remains private. Over time, functioning without full renewal becomes familiar. Familiar states feel safe, even when they limit depth of rest. Recognizing this quiet fatigue is not an act of criticism. It is a widening of awareness. Awareness does not weaken stability. It allows space within it. Competence has a quiet way of protecting appearance. When responsibilities are met and expectations are fulfilled, there is little reason to question the cost beneath that steadiness. The structure looks stable, so the system assumes stability. Being capable often means continuing forward even when energy feels reduced. Tasks are handled with care. Commitments are honored. The outer rhythm remains consistent enough to reassure others and even oneself. Over time, this steady performance can mask subtle depletion. Effort increases slightly, though results remain the same. Focus still functions, yet it requires more internal pressure to maintain. Because nothing collapses, fatigue becomes difficult to justify. There is no clear crisis. There is no obvious failure. The absence of disruption can create the impression that rest is sufficient. In this environment, signals of tiredness grow quieter rather than louder. The system adapts by narrowing attention and conserving energy in small ways. Spaciousness becomes less accessible, though function remains intact. Capability, in this sense, becomes a shield. It prevents visible breakdown, though it also hides the gradual thinning of ease. The pattern does not emerge from weakness. It emerges from strength practiced consistently. When strength is relied upon daily, pausing can feel unnecessary. The habit of continuing feels more natural than the habit of stopping. Recognizing this dynamic does not diminish competence. It simply introduces awareness into the space where effort has been silently sustained. Awareness allows steadiness to exist without requiring constant tightening beneath it. Stopping can feel strangely unproductive when a life has been shaped by momentum. Movement becomes familiar. Completion becomes reassuring. Pausing can feel like leaving something unfinished, even when nothing urgent remains. Rest can also feel undefined. A task has clear edges. A responsibility has a clear result. Rest offers less certainty. The mind may reach for something to refine, simply because refinement feels safer than stillness. In that mindset, quiet time becomes another space to manage. Planning continues. Reviewing continues. Small improvements feel necessary. The system stays engaged, not from anxiety alone, but from habit and identity. For someone who has learned to be reliable, stopping can carry an internal discomfort. The body may pause, while the mind keeps scanning for what might be missed. The intention is not self-punishment. The intention is to stay prepared. This is why rest can be delayed even when exhaustion is present. The feeling of being done does not arrive. There is always something that could be handled better, something that could be made smoother, something that could be checked one more time. Over time, the ability to rest becomes tied to permission. Permission often feels earned only after everything is complete. Since everything is rarely complete, true rest becomes rare. This pattern does not mean something is wrong. It means responsibility has been taken seriously for a long time. The nervous system learned that staying engaged kept life steady. Awareness begins to change the pattern, not by forcing stillness, but by noticing the moment when rest starts to feel undeserved. Noticing creates a small opening. An opening is where ease can begin. Quiet moments often reveal what busy hours tend to conceal. During the day, attention moves outward toward tasks, conversations, and responsibilities that require steady engagement. External movement provides structure, giving the mind a clear direction to follow. When the pace slows, internal space becomes more noticeable. Without constant input from the outside world, impressions that were quietly set aside begin to surface with greater clarity. This timing can feel inconvenient, though it reflects a natural process of integration. The mind makes use of available space. When silence expands, reflection follows. Conversations from earlier in the day, small decisions, or unfinished impressions may return, not to overwhelm, but to organize themselves more fully. At night, environmental stimulation decreases and sensory input becomes softer. Reduced activity allows subtle mental movement to stand out more clearly against the background of stillness. Thoughts that seemed distant during the day can feel closer and more defined. This shift does not signal a problem. It indicates that awareness now has room to process what was previously postponed. Reviewing an interaction or reconsidering a detail often arises from a wish to understand rather than from flaw. In a state of mental fatigue, that organizing effort can feel heavier than usual. Thinking continues, though clarity feels slightly thinner. Resolution may be sought even when none is immediately required. Understanding this contrast changes interpretation. Nighttime thought is not an enemy of rest. It is activity meeting space that has finally opened. Space itself is neutral. It only feels unfamiliar when engagement has been constant for a long time. The effort to stop thinking can quietly increase alertness. When the mind is told to be still, attention turns toward monitoring whether stillness has been achieved. That monitoring itself becomes another form of activity. Trying to control thought often shifts focus from rest to evaluation. A subtle question begins to repeat in the background, asking whether the mind has become quiet enough. The search for silence creates a new task. This process is understandable. Control feels stabilizing. If thinking is perceived as the problem, then stopping thought appears to be the solution. The nervous system responds by tightening slightly, preparing to manage what seems out of order. Tightening does not look dramatic. It may appear as mild effort behind the eyes or a faint sense of mental pressure. The intention is not self-criticism. The intention is resolution. In that state, awareness remains directed toward the very activity it hopes to reduce. Thoughts become more noticeable because they are being watched closely. Observation becomes evaluation, and evaluation sustains engagement. Allowing thinking to exist without immediate correction introduces a different rhythm. Attention no longer circles around whether the mind is behaving properly. Instead, thoughts are recognized as movement rather than as errors. Movement does not require suppression to soften. It requires space. When attention relaxes its grip, the system often adjusts on its own without being forced. This adjustment is gradual. It does not arrive through command. It emerges through reduced pressure. Rest deepens, not when thought is eliminated, but when vigilance around thought decreases. Observation carries a different quality than control. Control narrows attention and searches for correction. Observation widens awareness and allows movement to unfold without interference. When thought is observed rather than managed, internal pressure begins to decrease. The mind no longer needs to prove that it is quiet enough. It is simply noticed as it moves. This shift may seem small, though its effect can be steady. Monitoring softens into witnessing. Evaluation gives way to simple acknowledgement. The system senses less demand for immediate adjustment. A watched thought loses some of its urgency when it is not treated as a problem. It becomes part of mental activity rather than a signal of failure. The nervous system responds to that difference in interpretation. Control often carries subtle tension. The body prepares to fix something. Muscles engage lightly. Breathing becomes slightly held. These changes are quiet, though they influence depth of rest. Observation does not require preparation. It does not ask the system to solve or refine. It creates space where thinking can pass without being amplified. Space allows natural regulation to emerge. When pressure decreases, internal pacing adjusts gradually. The mind does not need to be pushed toward stillness. It often moves there on its own when interference reduces. This does not mean thought disappears. Movement may continue in softer forms. The difference lies in the relationship to that movement. Rest deepens through reduced resistance. Ease grows where correction is no longer demanded. Expectations about rest can quietly create tension. When recovery is measured against an ideal, sleep becomes something that must perform rather than something that unfolds naturally. A belief may form that true rest requires a completely quiet mind and a fully refreshed morning. When that standard is not met, subtle disappointment can arise. Disappointment adds a layer of evaluation to an experience that was meant to restore. The mind then begins to assess rest itself. Questions surface about whether enough hours were achieved or whether sleep was deep enough. Rest turns into another domain for improvement. This evaluation does not need to be harsh to have impact. Even mild comparison between expectation and reality can tighten the system. The nervous system senses pressure to achieve a certain state and responds by remaining slightly engaged. Perfection around rest becomes another task to complete. Instead of softening into what is available, awareness searches for what is missing. The gap between how it should feel and how it feels grows more noticeable. Mental fatigue can persist in that gap. Energy is used not only to move through the day, but also to judge whether recovery has been sufficient. The effort is subtle, though it adds weight. Allowing rest to be imperfect changes that dynamic. When sleep is viewed as a process rather than a performance, internal pressure decreases. There is less need to measure and more space to receive. Rest does not require flawless stillness. It deepens through acceptance of gradual adjustment. Easing expectations often softens fatigue more effectively than striving for ideal calm. A sense of safety plays a quiet role in how deeply rest is felt. The body does not fully soften simply because activity has stopped. Release begins when the system recognizes that nothing requires immediate response. Safety includes more than physical surroundings. It reflects emotional steadiness and the absence of urgency. When no correction is needed and no decision must be made, internal pacing gradually slows. If readiness has been practiced for a long time, calm conditions may not immediately shift internal rhythm. The environment can feel peaceful while subtle alertness continues beneath the surface. That alertness once supported stability and helped maintain order. Over time, constant preparedness can narrow the depth of restoration. Sleep may occur without interruption, though renewal feels partial rather than complete. The difference lies not in hours slept, but in how fully vigilance releases. When nothing needs to be monitored, muscles ease without instruction. Breathing deepens without effort. The system responds not to command, but to the quiet recognition that it is safe to pause. Small cues influence this recognition. A familiar space, steady breathing, or gentle awareness of the present moment can signal that adjustment is unnecessary. These cues do not force relaxation. They create conditions where relaxation can emerge. Rest becomes more accessible when safety is sensed rather than assumed. The nervous system gradually trusts that stillness does not equal neglect. In that trust, restoration deepens naturally. There are times when tiredness settles quietly without being fully noticed. Daily rhythm continues, and responsibilities move forward in their usual way. Nothing appears disrupted on the surface. Steadiness can become familiar over time. Managing details, responding thoughtfully, and maintaining structure begin to feel natural. Strength blends into routine without drawing attention to the effort behind it. Within that familiarity, fatigue may remain subtle. It does not insist on being seen. It rests beneath conversation and activity, present but understated. Recognition unfolds slowly. When tiredness is acknowledged without criticism, internal posture shifts in gentle degrees. The system no longer needs to hold itself as firmly as before. Effort always leaves traces. Even when responsibilities are handled well, energy is spent in small and continuous ways. Those traces gather quietly across days and weeks. Allowing them into awareness changes how tension is carried. Muscles soften slightly. Breathing deepens without instruction. The habit of constant readiness loosens in small increments. This loosening does not reduce capability. It refines it. Stability becomes less rigid and more adaptable. Strength remains, though it no longer relies on concealment. Nothing dramatic occurs in this process. There is no sudden collapse and no sharp shift. Change appears gradually, unfolding at a pace that feels safe to the system. In that gradual unfolding, restoration gains space. Recovery begins not through force, but through steady acknowledgement. Recovery rarely arrives all at once. The system does not shift from tension to ease in a single movement. Change unfolds in small and steady adjustments that may be easy to overlook. When vigilance has been sustained for a long period, relaxation is learned gradually. The body tests stillness in subtle ways. It releases slightly, then observes. It loosens again when no threat follows. This pacing is not hesitation. It is intelligence. The nervous system adapts based on experience, and experience teaches caution before complete release. Over time, repeated moments of safe quiet reshape internal rhythm. Muscles soften more quickly. Breathing settles with less effort. Thought slows without needing to be managed. Restoration builds through repetition rather than intensity. A single night of sleep may not undo extended strain. Gentle consistency often creates deeper change than dramatic attempts to reset everything at once. Small signs of recovery may appear first. Mornings feel marginally lighter. Attention feels slightly more spacious. Irritation reduces by a small degree. These changes are modest, though meaningful. Expecting sudden transformation can create impatience. Impatience reintroduces pressure. Pressure interrupts the very process that recovery depends upon. Allowing restoration to unfold at its own pace supports stability. The system responds best when it does not feel rushed or corrected. Gradual easing may seem almost invisible, though it accumulates. Subtle shifts gather quietly until steadiness feels less effortful. Recovery deepens through patience. Patience reinforces safety. Safety encourages further release. There may still be evenings when rest feels incomplete. The body may lie down and sleep may come, while a faint sense of effort remains somewhere beneath the surface. That experience does not mean recovery has failed. It simply reflects a system learning a different rhythm. Patterns that formed through responsibility and care do not disappear overnight. They soften through repeated experiences of quiet that do not require adjustment. Each moment of noticing without correcting becomes part of that learning. Rest does not demand perfection. It does not require a silent mind or a flawless morning. It unfolds in layers, sometimes subtle, sometimes almost unnoticeable at first. Even partial release has value. A slightly deeper breath, a small easing in the shoulders, a gentler tone in thought, all contribute to restoration. These shifts may seem modest, though they accumulate quietly over time. There is no need to rush this process. The nervous system responds best when it is not pressured into change. Trust develops gradually, built through consistent signals that stillness is safe. On nights when the mind remains lightly active, it is enough to allow that activity without resistance. Awareness can rest alongside thought rather than against it. Nothing needs to be solved in this moment. Nothing needs to be perfected. Rest is not a destination to reach. It is a relationship that deepens with patience. Over time, that relationship becomes steadier. Ease feels more accessible. Vigilance loosens without being forced. For now, simply remaining present with what is here is enough. Even when rest does not feel complete, the process of softening has already begun.